I've heard it said that love only exists in the space that's in between people. Yeah, I know it sounds like it should be on a greeting card or something like that, but there is some truth there. In order to love fully, you have to know where you stop and another person starts. Brene Brown puts it this way: boundaries are a prerequisite for compassion and empathy. She says we can't connect with someone unless we're clear about where we end and they begin. If there's no autonomy between people, then there's no compassion or empathy, just enmeshment. It's the season of Lent, and Lent is an opportunity for self-reflection. The traditional practices of Lent are all focused on the self: prayer, fasting, acts of piety, those kinds of things. The entire season is framed with a story that we call the temptation in the wilderness. It's a story about Jesus spending 40 days by himself, in solitude, inside his own head, praying and fasting. If I'm honest, I've always struggled a little bit with this kind of self-help aspect of the season of Lent. I mean, it's a sacred season and there's nothing inherently wrong with, giving up sweets for Lent, right? But my question is, if I'm giving up sweets because they're bad for me and I'll be healthier if I do, then is that really connected to the meaning of this season? I mean, shouldn't I just go ahead and give them up anyway? But what if we would reorient our Lenten practices? I mean, this year, what if fasting is not just a discipline of self-care? What if this sort of self-reflective season of Lent is more about learning where I stop and where other people start? What if fasting is more about addressing enmeshment in my life so that I can recognize my own autonomy and then deepen my compassion and empathy I have for my neighbor? Now, of course, reorienting Lenten practices to this degree really does expose ourselves. And that's not easy. In fact, it can be pretty scary. It requires us to be vulnerable, to get uncomfortable, to be an emotional sitting duck for a little while. And yeah, that kind of work does not come without some risk. But in this case, I'm convinced that the risk is well worth the reward. If we're willing to become vulnerable in our effort to know ourselves more fully, if we could somehow lay everything bare before God in order to recognize where our boundaries lie, then we very well may discover that our capacity to love increases immeasurably. If it is true that love exists in the spaces in between people, then discovering and defining those spaces is indeed a work of love. Maybe someone should put that on a greeting card.